Yes.
While we wait on our quorum, I just wanted to tell you I'm having some intermittent internet issues, so just let me know if you have a problem hearing me.
I am as well. So that will make
Well,
two
we're
of
going to
us.
fix that with some of these funds, so.
All right, I believe Mr. Livingston's with us now.
Very well. So we do have a quorum at this point.
Yes, ma'am.
All right. So at this point, I'll entertain a motion to accept the minutes for June the 9th, 2021.
So moved.
Second?
Is there a second?
Second?
Thank you. Any further discussion as it relates to the minutes? Any corrections? If not, Ms. Only, will you please call for the vote?
Yes, ma'am. Livingston,
Yes.
Thank you.
Barron, and Newton.
Yes.
Yes.
Motion passes.
The next on our agenda is the adoption of the agenda. Mr. Brown, do you have any corrections or anything you need to add at this point?
No, I do not have any corrections to add to the agenda or changes, Madam Chair.
Thank you. I'll entertain a motion to adopt the agenda.
So moved, Madam Chair.
Second?
Is there a second?
Second?
Any discussion? If not, Ms. Only, please call for the vote.
Livingston,
Yes.
Barron, and Newton.
Yes.
Ms. Only, will you please call for the vote?
Livingston,
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Barron, yes. Okay, motion passes.
I sure hope we're gonna make it through with this internet challenge that we're having today. So the next order of business. Okay. So then. Mr. Brown, will you provide us an
Yes, ma'am. I believe I heard you ask me to provide you with an update for the beginning item on the agenda, which would be ERAP 1. So I'm going to proceed with that being the understanding. In the packet that was sent to the county council, this information will be noted in that packet. And while we have some updated information, we want to be consistent with the information that we're providing for these meetings. So I'll be sharing the information that is associated with that report that I provided to the council related to ERA 1. So at the time of this report that was submitted to you, the date would be as of 7/7 and would be AM projections or monies that were spent and approved by that date. So at that time in your packet, I presented that the amount that had been approved was a little bit over $7 million. It was $7,142,000. And that represented payments that had gone out in both the form of rental arrears, future rent, utility arrears, rental arrears, as well as future rent. And that had been approved, representing 1,232 citizens in Richland County who had been approved for those funds. So that information is consistent with what you would find in your agenda packet associated with the report of the county administrator for the update on the Employee Rental Assistance Program. And we termed that Employee Rental Assistance Program number 1. So the update for that is, again, as of the document in your packet, $7 million, as well as 1,232 applications approved representing residents in Richland County having been approved to receive those funds. So, Madam Chair, that would be the update on ERA 1.
You're muted, Ms. Barron.
Thank you so much. Technology is giving me a little fit today. So, Mr. Brown, thank you for your report. I did miss a portion of it. However, I would like to open up for any questions from the committee. If you have any questions or comments at this point from any of the committee or council members that are present.
Yeah. Yes, quickly, Mr. Brown, that 1,232 applications that you're saying they have been approved?
That is correct. That the amount of money that is shown associated with that 1,232 applications, those have been approved. Those are approved applications, and that's the funding represented by those approved applications.
When were these folks? When are they expected to actually receive a check?
So a number of those individuals have already received their checks.
Okay.
There are some, Chair Livingston, that may not have. Generally speaking, after the applications are approved, it's about a 3-day window between the time that document is sent to finance. Finance then goes through the process of getting those checks cut and then mailed out. So that's probably somewhere between a 3 to 5-day total process between the approvals, checks getting cut, going to the mail, being mailed out, and then that's in the hands of the U.S. Postal Service from that time, Mr. Livingston.
All right, thank you.
Any further questions from any of the committee members or council that's present?
Ms. Barron.
Yes,
just
Ms.
wanna
Newton,
check.
you're recognized.
Thank you. I have questions that I think might be better addressed towards the ERA 2. So is it correct to say that we feel that phase 1 has been concluded and phase 2 has begun, or phase 2 is immediately about to begin?
Phase 2 would be immediately at the conclusion of phase 1. We do not want to stop and have phase 1 be halted or being the money expended, and then we start up phase 2. So,
Okay.
Ms. Newton, what we're going to be asking the committee today is to vote to approve us to move forward so that we can move into ERA 2 at the conclusion of ERA 1's funds being expended.
And I understand the desire to not have a halt, and I agree with that idea. Can you, and maybe I just missed it in my packet, in terms of the way that you see the process working, when would ERA 2 begin, more or less?
When all the funds are depleted from ERA 1.
Okay.
And the reason why I say it that way, Ms. Newton, is because ERA 2 has some slightly different protocols. And so we will not be able to mix the two programs.
Understood. Then in that case, Ms. Barron, I'll wait and see if any of my colleagues have questions. And if they don't, I will ask my questions and let Mr. Brown decide if they go in the first bucket or the second bucket.
Sure. Thank you. Any further questions
I'm good.
for Mr. Brown as it relates to ERA? Okay, Ms. Newton, you want to proceed?
Okay. Thank you. I have about 4 questions, Mr. Brown. So the first is, well, number one, thank your staff for providing the red line version of this policy. It made it a lot easier to review. I really do appreciate that. One of the items that is in ERA 2, and it also appears to be in ERA 1 as well, is other expenses that are related to moving, but not necessarily directly related to COVID. And so is that something that we have been publicizing in terms of our communications about emergency rental assistance? I know I've seen rent, I know I've seen utilities, but some of these other expenses like deposits, et cetera, I'm not sure if we've been promoting those.
No, ma'am. The main thing that we have been communicating to individuals is their rental assistance and utility assistance, because that's been the lion's share of the, I guess, the voice in terms of the eviction notices and the turning off of services.
Sure, and my impression would be that they go together, right? So we're not allowed to pay the other expenses unless we are doing the emergency rental assistance. Then my next question is, can you give me an idea of, and this might be a Mike King question, are we at a point where the calls are really steady and easy to handle? Do we feel like we're being overwhelmed with phone calls that we're receiving? I know I had an opportunity to be with some county employees who I wouldn't have thought would have been answering calls that were like, yeah, you know, we're answering calls for the emergency rental program. So I'm just curious to know how that workflow goes, and how we're staffed up for that.
So, and I don't think we have Mr. King on the line with us today, but we do have multiple arms of county government associated with this program. So I do know that internally we had government community services that was a part of this process as well, who was handling phone calls. We want to, that was largely due to citizens trying to have in-person appointments. And so we had doing that. As well as the services that we were getting from Tetra Tech, who has a call center that is handling the large volume of calls and have the case managers assigned to the applicants. So those are the personnel that I'm aware of that are largely handling these programs, Ms. Newton.
Okay, and do you have any sense of if the call volume is so high that, you know, they're feeling like, oh my gosh, so many people are calling, or if it's tapered off and is more, I don't want to say routine, but perhaps less hectic?
I would say without Mike King here to speak, I would say that the majority of the calls that I believe that are some of the repetitive calls that are not slowing down, as you would imagine, would be the calls who, once people are approved and they're trying to track the actual receipt of the finances. So whether or not their accounts have been paid to the utility companies or the landlords, or they themselves, when can they get their checks? I believe that those are the additional call volumes that are driving the majority of the calls, rather than, you know, the initial persons coming in for the application process.
Okay, and I may need to ask Mr. King this, but in terms of when people call into our call center, are these social workers that they're talking to, or are they just staff that has been trained in what our emergency rental process is that's answering the phone call?
I don't believe that by designation, they're social workers. I do know
Mhm.
trained staff who
Okay.
are trained specific to our program. Whether or not they're also social workers, I'm not sure, but they are trained staff that are specific to our program.
Perfect. And then my last question is, there are mentions in the policies and procedures, and I guess it applies equally to ERA 1 and 2, where it mentions the oversight committee. And is that this body? And if not, can you just remind me who the oversight committee is?
Right. So that is listed in there that we do have a group that's the oversight committee. And I don't want to get the appeals committee mixed up with the oversight committee. I'll have to take a look, Ms. Newton, because I'm thinking of people that are in my head are people that are a part of the appeals committee and not the oversight committee.
And I can take that answer offline.
Yes.
When I read that in the policy document or the procedure document, I wasn't sure. Ms. Barron, that's my last question.
Let me take a look.
And I'm happy to take an answer later.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Oversight committee.
Are there any further questions
Ms.
for ERAP?
Ms.
One.
Ms. Barron,
Yes,
can you
sir.
hear me? Because my computer's acting up here. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Just have a quick process question, because folks will call me and say, I sent me information in or whatever, I got no response. What happened when you get the person's information? What do they mean when they say have not got a response yet? When did they get a response? How long did it take to get a response?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chair, and that's a broad question, so I'm going to try to answer specifically. If a person says they submit their information and they haven't gotten a response, please remember that the submittal is electronic. So when they submit their documentation into the system, there are entries made into the system by the case managers, and if that application information that they submitted is somehow incomplete, a case manager will contact them about incomplete information. If the information is complete and they're trying to verify information, they will also be contacted. I can send you out, and I did this in response to a couple other questions that I've gotten. I sent out an example of a application where where it shows the level of detail that goes into entries, and they're timestamped, they're dated, there's names attached from the case managers, and the entries are based off all the points of contact. So if a person says, I haven't heard anything back, Mr. Livingston, two things we ask for. One, we ask for the name of that individual so that we can actually check the software program to see if that individual's name is in there. And then from there, we can contact that person and communicate to them, what we're showing in the system, what they have left to do. But we haven't had too many scenarios where we have had individuals who have actually completed the application process or even started it where there's not information in the system where we've contacted them. So
Okay.
I would need those names, and again, we don't mind following up with those individuals, but it is a heavily documented system, so we can track that information, Mr. Chair Livingston.
Thank you. I know how to respond to that question now. Thanks.
And so, Mr. Livingston, also, you may want to reference page 23 in our packet. It's a similar flow chart as to when information is brought in or applicants apply. And I can speak personally to having that same conversation with constituents, and Mr. Brown and Mr. King, without hesitation, was able to give an update to those constituents. And even as late as yesterday, I received a message on social media just thanking the county for having these funds available and the quick timeliness of getting those funds in their actual hands. So, that goes to show that our team is definitely working real hard to make sure that there's not a whole lot of lag time. So thank you, Mr. Brown.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And if I may do a quick follow-up.
Sure.
So we recognize from time to time that there may be some citizens who have some delays that they were not expecting. And so all we do at that point is we do ask, for that information so that we can go in and identify and figure out if something fell through the cracks. Again, we have the ability to look at all the documentation. Everything is detailed. And so we're able to identify if there are breakdowns or failures and put in mechanisms to try to address those. So certainly we're trying to improve, and I think we have as the process has gone along. We're now trying to also see if we can expedite or improve more the time for payment to get into the hands of individuals and utility providers, because we are hearing that sometimes that we're just not having success with the mail. And while we know we can't control that, we're trying to figure out how to best address that. And so we are working on that still today to improve that part of the process.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. So if there isn't any further updates that you need to provide for us for the ERA 1, we're ready to move right into ERAP 2. And if you could introduce this to the committee.
Ms. Barron,
Yes.
it looks like Ms. Mackey has her hand raised, and I can wait till ERA 2 for my question.
Thank you. Thank you. So, Ms. Mackey,
Thank you.
before
I think
Mr. Brown starts with ERAP 2, did you have a question that you'd like to ask?
I do. And Mr. Brown, like I said, I'm not sure if this is for you or Mr. King, but I'm sure you can tell me. So with the eviction moratorium schedule,
You may proceed.
can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. With the eviction moratorium scheduled to end at the end of this month, do we anticipate that's going to change any of this flow chart? Will we be able to expedite funds getting back to folks sooner than normal, just to help with that? Or I guess, does the end of the moratorium change anything that we're currently doing in our process?
Well, one of the things that we hope to have some level of influence in is we've talked to the magistrate's office. And one of the things we talked about was Mike King has developed a training to provide to them. We've talked about them potentially sending us individuals who are on their list, where they're having on their dockets, individuals who are renters who are set for some eviction cases, to determine whether or not those individuals are in our system so that we could potentially provide some level of information to those cases. Because one of the things about this program, Ms. Mackey, is that we can respond to information, as I was sharing with the magistrates, but we cannot give out personal identifiable information. So we would need the, for example, in this instance, as we talked about, the court system to provide us information, and then we can look at that against what we have in our system to help them navigate whether or not an individual is a participant in our program and what the status of that participant is, so that they could use that information as they are making their cases, or as they're dealing with those potential evictions. That's related to ERA number 1. ERA number 2, there's actually some language in there, which I'm not sure if the county attorney was able to join this meeting or not, but there's some language in ERA 2 that the U.S. Treasury has asked that the organizations that are giving out this funding, in this case, Richland County, that we provide some type of, in some instances, they use the word encouragement, but in other instances, they say that there's a kind of basically a stay on the landlord that receives money from the program, basically, so many words, agrees to not evict if they receive these funds for a period of time. So, you know, that's a part of ERA 2, and that's one of the changes in the policy information that's different from ERA number 1.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Barron, I'm not sure.
Ms. Newton, did you have a question before we go to ERAP 2 that you
Thank
wanted
you.
to ask?
Thank you, Ms. Barron. Mr. Brown, I'll just ask this question and then I'll let you answer it in ERA 2 that we're trying to get to, which is that originally, well, and we are still prioritizing people who are at 50% of AMI or below.
Can you hear me?
Yes, Mr. Brown, can you hear me?
I can, yes, ma'am.
Okay, good.
The
We're on a different.
still exist. Yes, ma'am.
Yes, but my question was, have we, and if we haven't yet, is there any point at which we will also expand the assistance to people at higher income levels? And you can answer that as part of ERA 2, if that's more appropriate. I'm just curious.
Yes, ma'am. I do not believe that the threshold for those priorities changed. I'm looking here to see if I can pull that out real quick. There was always a limitation on who the program is applicable to. And I'll try to take a look here, Ms. Newton, and see if I can't pull that real quick. But I do believe that those thresholds have changed.
And I guess my question was, I understand that we're prioritizing, but for example, let's say that you have a certain number of applications that are at 50% AMI and below, and then you have a certain number of applications that might have a teeny bit more income than that are quote unquote in the queue. I'm trying to figure out, have we reached a point in our program where we've been able to get to people in the queue or not? And if there's a point where we might have the funds or the resources or the ability to be able to do that, because my understanding is those guidelines are very, very strict. And so, you know, a few dollars can really make the difference there.
Right. So I understand your question, and what I'll do is that is something, Ms. Newton, that I would have to get the details on to see if in fact how many folks, and I'm gonna use the term you use, are in queue that would not be at the high priority, but are still eligible for the program that have not been served because of the priority.
Thank you.
Ms. Newton, did you have anything further?
No, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. So, Mr. Brown, I think we're ready to move forward with item number 5.
All right, let me go back here. So associated with that, moving back up here, with ERA 2, the big key here is something that we've kind of touched on briefly, but it involves a level of discussion that we have not had to have before. And the particular area, and again, if legal is on, we may need to have a discussion about this in an executive session. But the particular area of concern related to ERA 2 is the provision associated with landlords receiving funds from this program. And so, I'm sorry, did I hear somebody? So the big deal there is there's the provision, and I'm trying to get right to it here where I can read to you what it says so that you can kind of key in on it. but it's associated with landlords receiving those funds and whether or not, as a result of that, those landlords can be told by the county that they are prohibited from evicting a tenant. So what it says here, and I believe that if you look at your fact sheet and you go to number 32, it says, there's a question that says, can grantees prohibit landlords from pursuing eviction for non-payment of rent for some period after receiving ERA assistance? And this is under your ERA 2 facts, and I believe it's number 32. And the response is, with respect to landlords that receive funds under an ERA program for a prospective rent, the grantee must prohibit the landlord from evicting the tenant for non-payment of rent during the period covered by the assistance. In addition, with respect to landlords that receive funds for rental arrears to promote the purpose of the program, the grantee is encouraged to prohibit the landlord from evicting the tenant for non-payment of rent for some period of time consistent with applicable law. In all cases, Treasury strongly encourages grantees to require landlords that receive funds under the ERA as a condition of receiving the funds not to evict tenants for non-payment of rent for 30 to 90 days longer than the period covered by the rental assistance. So in this instance, ERA 2 is substantially different from ERA 1 in that there is this prohibition of eviction associated with the receipt of funds under ERA 2. And we did receive a separate pot of money for ERA 2. So it's not just in terms of title only that we're talking about this. It is the separate pot of funds that we receive. So that's why we're addressing this so that we can make sure that we can move forward with the program, but also understand, can Richland County, prohibit landlords from evicting tenants? Do we have that authority to do so? And that's something that we've sent to our legal team, and hopefully that's a conversation that we can be able to have sooner rather than later, so we can know how to address landlords who may be receiving or wanting to receive these funds from the ERA pot number 2.
So Mr. Brown, to be clear, we need further guidance from legal as to whether or not we can do this. This is allowable for us from the county's perspective.
Yes, ma'am, because what I'm going to be asking the committee to do, and it really ask you to do today so that we can move forward and meet timelines associated with this program, is I want you to approve the policies and procedures manual and allow us to run ERAP number 2, just like we did ERAP number 1, with the additions of the new information from the Treasury guidance. So that's why that's important, because we certainly recognize that county council is going to be, gone in August and maybe returning at the end of August, but we anticipate potentially being at a point to where it is possible that we have approved funding that is all approved out by the end of that time and needing to be going into ERP pot number 2 before council convenes again. So we want to be prepared for that and have all our ducks in a row.
Yes, sir. So I don't see the attorney on the line at this moment.
I just jumped on, Ms. Barron.
Okay, great. So just briefly, Mr. Brown, if you could just kind of rehash what you just stated so that the attorney can give us guidance, please.
Yes, ma'am. We're simply trying to figure out, good afternoon, Elizabeth. We're trying to figure out whether or not the county has the authority to prohibit landlords from evicting tenants if they receive money from this ERAP #2 program, that can be a condition that we could enforce.
I have a little bit of background on this from Mike King, sent an email, and I followed up with him earlier today with a question. From what I can gather so far, it looks like the Treasury is requiring us at one point to put that prohibition in. Okay, so there's two different parts of this. One is during the pendency of receiving this money. Let me read what it says of the, 1 second, I got this email pulled up. It says, with respect to landlords that receive funds under this program for prospective rent, the grantee must prohibit the landlord from evicting the tenant for non-payment of rent during the period covered by the assistance. So I think in that instance, we can, well, we must actually, but we also can then enforce that in a court of law. Now, I'm not saying that would be a fun thing or an easy thing. It's time consuming. I'm not sure we'd get money back, but we can attempt to enforce that, and that would be fine. The other part of it is they recommended a further time period, another 30 to 90 days after the assistance has ended. And I wouldn't recommend that portion. With the original part, we had federal law, we have federal guidelines to back us up. This is a requirement of program, a grant program. We're receiving money from them. We have nothing like that for this other 30 to 90 day period. We can contract with anybody. And I suppose that would be the way we would go about that. It's a contract, and we would try then to enforce that in the court of law. But it's not something I'd recommend. I think it'd be difficult to enforce, time consuming to enforce, and kind of just a nightmare of things to get involved in. But the very first part, I see no issue with it. As the Treasury has given us guidance and a requirement, I have no problem with that. The other is a little more concerning.
Thank you. So given this guidance, I think that we're, and Mr. Brown, correct me if I'm wrong, I think we're clear to be able to move forward with a motion out of this committee to be able to move forward with ERAP 2 as we've implemented ERA 1, keeping in mind the brief conversation that we just had about evictions. Is that correct, sir?
I believe so. I do believe you have a hand up, Madam Chair, so that might need some clarification.
Sure. Ms. Newton, you're recognized.
Thank you, Ms. Barron. My question for our attorney would be, I understand the recommendation that we not enforce something that's not supported by federal law. My question is, would you have any heartburn if in our guidance we use the same language where we encourage the landlord to not evict the citizens, but it's not a requirement in those places where we're not allowed to require it? Does that make sense?
That
Okay.
makes total sense. I think we should absolutely use the same language, say there's a Treasury recommendation, all of the above.
Okay, thank you. Thank you,
You're welcome.
Ms. Barron.
Sure. Any further questions or concerns about that we need to address from Mr. Brown as it relates to ERAP 2 and its implementation? And I don't see any hands. Mr. Brown, did you have anything further you wanted to share about plan number 2?
No, ma'am. To your point, just asking for the committee to submit a motion to approve staff to continue with implementing ERAP number 2, consistent with the protocols that we've established for ERAP number 1, with the updated Treasury guidance provided specific to ERA number 2. So that means that everything that you all have been seeing, all the program assistance that we have in place, we will continue to utilize those resources to do ERAP number 2, just like we did ERAP number 1, with the only change being that we would have to update our policies and procedures manuals, as you have in front of you now, to reflect the new guidance from the U.S. Treasury related to ERAP number 2.
So we do need a motion coming out of this committee, and I'll entertain the motion at this time so that we can move forward with present it to full council.
And Madam Chair, I want to make sure we include the language that Mrs. Newton just reference to as opposed to requiring the time frame at the end, the 30 days, 30 to 90 days, that we just simply just recommend it.
Yes, sir.
Madam Chair,
You recognize Ms. Newton.
thank you. Mr. Brown, I tried to write really fast, so if I didn't say this correctly, I will accept additional feedback. Madam Chair, I move that we approve staff to continue with ERAP2 using the same protocols that they used for ERAP1, but updating that with the guidance we received from the Treasury Department and the additional modifications discussed in committee.
So there's a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Any further discussion at this time?
Mr. Brown, does that do what you need, sir?
It does. And there's one quick question for you, Ms. Newton, because you mentioned this. Was there any particular staff that you were concerned about that was working with the ERAP program that you thought should be more or less of? Because I heard you mention that there was some staff that you kind of surprised you a little bit.
Well, I just didn't know. So I don't feel that I'm able to answer that question right now without getting into the weeds. And I feel that as I understand our protocol documents, that they give you flexibility in terms of how you're managing that process. And so I feel comfortable having a conversation at a later date about that.
Okay, no problem. So I just wanted to make sure that that we were aware that we were going to continue to utilize the resources that we currently have in place. So that's all. Thank you, Ms. Newton. Yes.
Sure. Thank you.
Question.
Any further discussion from any of the committee members or council that is present? Given none, Ms. Only, if you will call for the vote.
Livingston,
Yes.
Barron,
Yes.
Newton.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Our next order of business is the American Rescue Plan initial proposal for the U.S. Treasury. This is a plan that we need to set forth, and it's our goal coming out of this committee that we set forth a couple of motions. But as we set forth this couple of motions, we want to have a plan in place. I've had the opportunity to meet with Administrator Brown and ACA Thompson to be able to look at how we can provide a plan that broadly discuss or broadly labels areas that we want to look at expending funds for, and then keeping in mind that we are currently still taking input via a survey, as well as we'll have public hearings on next week during our coronavirus ad hoc committee meeting on next Monday. But Mr. Brown and his team have already put forth a plan that you'll find in our packets beginning on page 54. And at this time, Mr. Brown, I'll turn it to you to further discuss.
Yes, ma'am. And I'm going to talk about some of the high levels. Then I'm certainly going to involve ACA Thomas in this discussion. But to Chair Barron's point, the first thing we want to talk about is the need for us to approve the preliminary plan, which is a condition that we have to meet in order for us to continue to be able to utilize these American Rescue Plan dollars from the U.S. Treasury. This preliminary plan, as broadly drafted, is not designed to be the final. As a matter of fact, if you look at the guidance provided by the Treasury, after you submit this initial plan, there are quarterly updates. Those quarterly updates can include additional information that we have for how we're going to use the funds, and what we're going to spend the funds on, as well as our processes. So this by no means is asking the committee or a council to approve something and then you won't have any future say. So that is not what this is at all. With that being said, one of the first things, or one of the three things I'm going to be asking for associated with this plan is the actual approval of the preliminary plan itself so that it can be submitted to Treasury. In addition to that, within the confines of this plan, something that we've talked about a couple of times now is the premium pay aspect. So one of the things I'm going to be asking for associated with this plan as a separate motion is going to be asking the committee to approve premium pay associated with the American Rescue Plan in the form of a COVID-19 hazard pay stipend. That hazard pay stipend, I'm asking for the committee to consider basically two groups. One group would be a group that has work associated with a direct exposure to COVID-19 through their routine work. Those groups, I'm not going to be, this is not all inclusive. You can decide if you want to go and list everybody now, that might be helpful. But for example, that would include your public safety groups, like your coroner's office, like your EMS, like your sheriff's department, like your emergency services, management personnel, as an example of people with direct exposure. And then the other group would be folks who are considered essential workers who were not necessarily having direct exposure by going out into the community, but they had to come into the workplace and do their work and physically from the office and not be allowed to remote. Part of the American Rescue Plan premium pay says you cannot be a remote worker and receive this premium pay. So we're not talking about remote workers. So I just want to clarify that for anyone that's on the call now or anyone that's listening, that a condition of the premium pay associated with the American Rescue Plan, remote work would not be acceptable. So we're not talking about paying remote workers. Those two groups that I talked about, I'm going to be recommending that $5,000 would be the stipend for the direct exposure group, and $2,500 would be the recommendation for the group, again, that was essential, but did not have to necessarily go and interface with the public in terms of direct exposure. So with that being said, Chair Barron, let me just stop there and see where we want to talk about and how we want to address the recommendation associated with the COVID-19 hazard pay stipend, which is what what I'm asking the committee to do under the American Rescue Plan premium pay for essential workers. So that's what I'm asking for this committee to consider. $5,000 for direct exposure groups, $2,500 for indirect exposure groups. Would not that stipend would not go to county administrator, ACAs, department directors. These are frontline personnel. It could possibly include some managers and supervisors because they may be frontline when you think about your detention center, for example. But certainly I'll stop there and let the group weigh in on either the amounts or the personnel as we navigate this particular item.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. So at this point, I'll open up to hear from the committee or any council members that are present to weigh in on the premium pay that's coming through our COVID-19 hazard pay.
Barron, I'm sorry, I can't raise my hand for some reason with my computer here, but I'd like to be recognized when you.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. You're recognized.
Ms. Brown, do we have an idea at this point in terms of what would be the dollar amount, or estimated dollar amount?
Yes, sir. Basically, we're looking at somewhere roughly about $6.5 million, and that's a rough estimate. But because we have to go back and reconcile. So if the council approves this, or the committee and the council, Then we have to reconcile the actual employees that are currently working. But yes, sir, that is a good rough estimate of the total expenditure associated with those dollar values.
Thank you.
Anything further, Mr. Livingston?
That's all for now.
Ms. Newton, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Brown, a few quick questions. So one is, I'm presuming, and just want to make sure that I'm tracking with you, this is a one-time payment, or is this something that we're going to reassess over time and continue to distribute, just for clarity?
So I was going to say that it is a one-time payment, but I did not want to, I guess, impose on the council as if you could not make another decision. So
Sure.
That's why I did not say a one-time payment. And that's
Okay, but that's your recommendation.
that is correct.
Okay. And then my next question is, do you have in your plan these groups really clearly defined in terms of who everyone is who would fit into this group? Or is this a situation where, with a motion today from the committee and approval by council, we would be saying, we agree to the broad plan, but you're still tweaking what some of the details are? This is not my way of asking you to give me a list of 125 positions. I just want to be clear on what a vote today means.
Yes, ma'am. So a vote today means that in some respects, it's still broad, but it's broad because we've heard in previous committee meetings that there was some discussion that council members had about groups that they felt maybe were not what you normally consider your essential workers in this situation. So we've gone back and we've identified, we spoke to all the departments, we have all the personnel already listed out, those that we believe will be applicable and those that would not be. And so we believe that while it's broad, we believe we have very defined parameters that we could present to the council, and the council could say yay or nay on the groups as given to us by the elected officials and department heads within the county.
So then, does that mean that this would come before us again with greater specificity?
That means that it could come from, I would not recommend that well, I guess you have time between the July 27th meeting. So it could come back to you before with greater specificity. Yes, ma'am, that could happen because we do have another meeting that the council could consider this. So the hope, Ms. Newton, was for us to at least move this forward so council could vote on it before its break. But
Okay.
it could come back to this committee because I believe Ms. Barron has already set another meeting, I believe, before the council's 27th meeting. So it could come back with greater specificity.
Thank you. And my question was not necessarily a request or a mandate to do so. Again, just want to understand, voting yes for this today, what that means. And I think that you've answered my question. So thank you, Madam Chair.
So Mr. Brown, I want to just kind of reiterate the point, I guess to add on to Ms. Newton. A vote today, we essentially can vote today to approve what has been presented to us, as well as to be able to move this forward to council as presented today.
Yes, ma'am, you could, absolutely.
And therefore giving you and your team giving y'all the allowance to be able to continue to identify those individuals.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, sir. Any further discussion about our premium pay as it relates to COVID-19 hazard pay?
I need to provide one piece of additional information, Madam Chair, if you'll recognize me.
Yes, sir.
So I'm sure there are several members of the council who have read the premium pay, and you probably are wondering why we haven't talked about what the cap is that we can do. So there is a cap associated with this. So ultimately, any motion associated with premium pay would have to include that we would not exceed the 150% of the average median income for a household in Richland County, which is going to be $82,150. So what that means by way of example is, let's just say, for example, you had a staff member who was a frontline person who would qualify for this benefit, whether it was the $5,000 or the $2,500. And let's say that person, for the purpose of this conversation, made $80,000. So they would not be able to receive the full $2,500 or $5,000 from the American Rescue Plan because there is a cap, and that is the cap. And our numbers are greater than the state number, so we were able to use the greater of the two. So even using the greater of the two, that is the cap. So no individual making above $82,150 will be able to receive additional funds from the American Rescue Plan pot of money. So we don't necessarily have a lot of individuals that would impact, but I want to go ahead and address that question now in case one or all of you were wondering, what about that cap associated with premium pay?
So they would not qualify for any funds at all.
Not if their salary was above $82,150, they would not qualify for pay from the American Rescue Plan dollars. So if the council said we got, and we can find out for you if anybody, meets that threshold, we'll know. We can say we got 5 people that meet that threshold and they qualify for 5 or 2 or 2,500, 5,000 or 2,500, depending on what tier they fall in. And so let's just say that 5 of them qualified for 2,500. We could say, okay, do you want us to then give those individuals a stipend utilizing other funds? Or is it just because of the limitations on the American Rescue Plan, they're just unable to receive the stipend that you would otherwise give them? Because the stipend is only a function of the American Rescue Plan dollars that we're currently speaking about. But that would be a separate decision that council could make or would have to make if they were faced with that challenge.
So my question would be to you, do we have a pot of money that we can utilize should we're faced with this?
So we'll have to take a look and see how much we're talking about. And depending on how much we're talking about, I think we would be able to address those individuals who may fall into that category, if any. It just really depends on the amount, Ms. Barron, to be honest with you. It comes down to the actual amount. So we'll have to go through and pick out any individual with those salaries. But again, I don't think that would be a large majority or a significant number. So it should be something that we could address.
So it definitely, given that, we want to include that portion into our motion.
Absolutely, yes, ma'am, because we cannot exceed that amount from the American Rescue Plan.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Is there any further discussion from any of the committee or council members that are present as it relates to this topic? If not, we do need a motion coming out of this committee that will allow Mr. Brown and his team to proceed with the COVID-19 hazard pay for our frontline workers, and also making sure that we include the individuals who will qualify at that 150% threshold.
So moved, Madam Chair. For administrative recommendation regarding the funding.
Second.
Is there, thank you, a second. Any further discussion? Given none, Ms. Olney, will you please call for the vote?
Livingston,
Yes.
Barron,
Yes.
Newton.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Mr. Brown, you want to proceed with your proposal?
Yes, ma'am. Let's go. We talked about in general the plan, but we hadn't actually approved the plan yet, but we can go to also within the plan. We believe that we have identified that there are a number of individuals, as we discussed during the budget process, of entities who have services that that are eligible to receive funding from the American Rescue Plan dollars. So those are some of the lump sum groups that were included as a part of our budget process. And we mentioned that we would look at the American Rescue Plan dollars, see whether or not we had eligible groups. We believe we have identified those eligible groups, and we have a recommendation to the committee. And if I could, I'm going to put her on the spot. ACA Lori Thomas, if you could quickly go to that amount so that we could ask the committee to address that recommendation from staff to approve those agencies, those amounts to be paid for using American Rescue Plan dollars.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Brown.
Thank you.
We've identified that of the 1.796439 in lump sum distributions that was approved by council, 1.706439 is actually eligible. So only $90,000 in funding was not eligible for lump sum. To determine this eligibility, our grant staff reached out to each one of the groups and actually received information back from them related to their impacts from COVID and how they are responding to COVID. So there were only two groups that would not qualify for lump sum distribution to be replaced with ARP funding. These would be called subrecipients, and there is a list there in Appendix A that lists all of the groups that would be subrecipients. And as with any grantee, they would have to agree to the terms of the grant. They would have to provide all documentation for the grant. And if by chance they did not comply with the rules of the grant, then there is a clawback ability for us to try to recoup funds, and they would not be paid until such time as they were to be reimbursed. Additionally, we have been instructed by council through motion to evaluate hospitality funding that may have been allocated. And there was only one actual event there one actual recipient there that we identified that could be funded with American Rescue Plan dollars. And that is the Richland County Tourism Commission or Recreation Commission for $325,000 to pave the Park Lane tennis courts because they are outdoor venues and have been heavily relied upon during COVID. And I'm happy to answer any questions if anyone has any.
Thank you, ACA Thomas. Before I open it up, I did have one question. You said there were two groups that did not qualify. Do we know who those two groups are?
Yes, ma'am. It was Ingenuity, simply based upon the business that they do, and the Greenview Swim Team.
Okay. Thank you. Any questions about the lump sum and the hospitality sub-recipients? Ms. Newton, you're recognized.
Thank you, but I think my colleague, Ms. Mackey, had her hand raised first. I'm happy to defer.
Did she? I saw yours pop up first. So Ms. Mackey.
Well, thank you, Ms. Newton. I'm not even on this committee, so thank you for letting me go first. I just had a quick question about if we, go the route with the proposal and fund these organizations out of the ARP funds, does that change the time frame in which these organizations receive the money? Meaning, if they would have gotten it from us, will they get it sooner? Does this change the time? Does it make it later for them to receive the money than they normally would?
Ms. Mackey, that's an excellent question. And we have actually spoken with these groups and just let them know that if this is the path that we were able to take and it was council's wishes, that there would be probably a 3 to 4 week delay, but they were all acceptable to that.
Thank you.
Anything further, Ms. Mackey?
That was it.
Okay. Ms. Newton, you're recognized.
And did add my
Thank
name
you.
to the list.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Ms. Barron. My quick question also around payment, which is my understanding with the regular Richland County process. Well, let me just not use that. My question to you is, do these organizations, presuming we pass this, receive all the funds in advance? Are the funds dispersed on a quarterly basis, et cetera? And I apologize if I missed that, because as I look at this list, my understanding of the funds is that they're supposed to be used for COVID related things. And so I'm just trying to figure out if the way this works is we pay everybody everything in advance, and then if Treasury deems so, it's clawed back at the end, or if there is incremental payment and incremental reporting, if that makes sense.
Yes, ma'am. It is incremental payments and incremental reporting, just as we do with our other grants. And they are
Thank you.
audited also.
Okay, thank you. And I ask, and I know it's totally different, but I know, for example, with hospitality tax, people are able to get a very large percentage of all of the funding in advance, and then some of the reporting comes later, depending on what the scheduling is. So I wasn't clear about this. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Livingston, you're recognized.
I think my question been answered. I'm not sure though. I basically wanted to know what is the difference between the payment approach if you got the rescue funds versus the current lump sum funds. What do the agencies have to do different?
They would have to do nothing differently. Keep in mind that we have until 2024 to expend these funds. So as long as they keep their track of, as long as they stay on track to use their funds within the year, they would see no difference.
Thank
It's
you.
just a different pot of money.
That's all I have, Madam Chair.
Any other questions or comments? Ms. Mackey, you're recognized.
Thank you. With this proposal, we are funding these organizations now. Is in the proposal, is there opportunity for other nonprofits or even these on this list to apply for additional funding next year, or is this a one and done thing right now?
Ms. Mackey, let me jump in on that. I see Lori didn't jump on that one. So no, seriously, I would say, are you asking about applying for additional American Rescue Plan dollars?
Correct.
Okay, so that is solely up to county council. So the American Rescue Plan dollars, as we continue to navigate this process, how they're going to be spent will be solely up to, of course, eligibility, but how you want to spend them. So what we simply did this year was identify an opportunity to provide some level of flexibility within the county's budget because of this new pot of funds where these folks are eligible. So that remains to be seen, but I don't know that you will or will not, as a council, decide to expend all those funds in a different form rather than allowing them to be utilized by groups seeking funding.
Ms. Mackey, does that answer your question?
I think so. So basically in the proposal that you've given that I'm looking at, where you have these broad categories, a nonprofit could fall in some of these broad categories.
That is correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
And Ms. Mackey, thank you for bringing that out, because that's indeed something that, we've had lots of conversation around. I know if Ms. McBride was here today, she would definitely want us to address that, to make sure that our local small businesses and nonprofits have an opportunity to participate or to be able to receive additional dollars, whether they're on this list or through other grant making opportunities. So thank you for raising that point. Any further questions? If not, we do need, this is another item that we will need a motion for, and we would need a motion to cover our lump sum distribution sub-recipients, as well as the hospitality tax sub-recipient.
But I think this would include it if I just simply move to approve the American Rescue Plan initial proposal from per the recommendation of the administrator. So then that is what you're asking, right, Mr. Brown, for us to approve your initial proposal for your plan, correct?
Yes, sir, and that would include both the preliminary plan
Right.
as a whole and the sub-recipients as listed. And I want to make sure, Lori, that we have listed out in here the tourism associated with Recreation Commission.
Yes, sir. It's specifically listed.
This includes.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chair. That Chair Livingston, that should do it. But certainly I would take the committee's recommendations, however you want to do it.
I ask a question before there's a motion made?
You recognize Ms. Newton.
Thank you. If it's going to be both of those. Mr. Brown, I do not want to nitpick this in any way. And so if you tell me these two things are unnecessary, I will accept your recommendation. In terms of looking at the broad outline of the plan that starts on page 59 and continues to page 60, you could have made this much more specific. And I realize that. One area that has been a big concern of mine that I don't see listed specifically on this particular list is food insecurity. And so I guess I'm wondering if you are just including that broadly in the second bullet point on page 60 in terms of assistance to nonprofits to address community impacts of the pandemic.
So
Would that fit there?
it would fit there, but what I would, let's go ahead. And if whoever makes the motion doesn't mind, let's go ahead and identify that. So that way there is clarity. And yes, ma'am, it will fall under that, but it does not hurt to go ahead and put that category in there for more clarity.
And then my other question would be on page 58 for the eligible uses, the first bullet point talks about it being eligible to help with impacts, including small businesses. But in our broad outline, that again is on page 59 and page 60, and I might have been a poor reader here, I didn't see any reference to possible business support. And I know that we can come back and adjust it, but I didn't know if that was something that the committee would be interested in adding writ large in this broad outline. So those two items, food insecurity and support for small business.
So Ms. Newton, I definitely had small business as a list to add to the list, but I was thinking that we were going to do two separate motions, and I was going to bring those items up at a later time. But since we're here, Mr. Brown, I think that we can loop this in as an acceptance to the plan as well as lump sum.
Yes, ma'am. Both the food insecurity, small business, and the other items that were already identified. Yes, ma'am, we could do that. And remember that I expect that we will be doing this again, members of this committee, because we will more narrowly tailor the plan over time with specific areas of focus that the committee and council ultimately decides to really address.
So essentially what we are accepting at this point is a broad plan with broad areas whereas in my mind, I'm thinking on a quarterly basis, we'll be filling in the gaps with programs and services that we look to provide within the community.
Yes, ma'am, that's correct. And for the purpose of this approval today, this is broad submission is what we'll submit to Treasury, which would include the updates that you all have mentioned as well as the information that you have in the packet.
Thank you. So, Mr. Livingston, as the maker of the motion, we need a couple of addendums, please, sir.
Yes,
To-
and I'll include those too, but let me just ask a quick question. Mr.
Yes,
Brown,
sir.
I've had several individuals on different groups, for example, someone with a primary health facility saying, can we present a proposal to provide something to get some rescue funds to the county? I have some folks with food security issues simply saying, I got a plan for food, I'm doing some things, can we get some of the county rescue money? What do I say to those agencies who wanted to know whether or not there's an opportunity for them to submit a proposal to council for rescue funds?
So have those agencies submit their proposals, and the staff we can vet those, and we can bring those to this committee like we would any other proposals, Mr. Chair, and do it that way, sir. Listen, we're not trying to reinvent the wheel. We want to get money where the money is needed. So if there are active partners out there who already have some things established that can work and that align with what the council wants to do, then staff can execute it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, going back to the motion, Ms. Barrett, I don't recall all those things we were talking about added on, so I'm willing to accept them though, but I don't remember what they all were.
Yes, sir. So we are broadly accepting the plan, the proposal set forth by Administrator Brown and his team,
Correct.
the plan, as well as the lump sum subrecipients and tourism subrecipients,
Right.
adding on other categories to include food insecurities and small businesses.
Okay. And this, again, is an initial proposal, so we'll keep that in mind.
Preliminary.
Yes. Okay.
Yes, sir.
I'm fine with that, Madam Chair.
Is there
I'll
a second?
that.
Thank you. Any further discussion? We talked a lot about it already. Anything else? But I'll do a swoop through here to make sure anyone has any burning questions. I don't see any. So Ms. Only, if you will please call for the vote.
Livingston,
Yes.
Barron,
Yes.
Newton.
Yes.
Motion passes.
All right. Thank you so much. Mr. Brown, does that conclude your report for the American Rescue Plan initial proposal?
Yes, ma'am. The preliminary plan. I know it's hard not to say initial proposal, but
Initial.
and I appreciate the committee and thank you, Madam Chair.
Yes. Ms. Newton, you're recognized.
Thank you. Just a quick question. In terms of the survey that we are doing with the community, is there a deadline on when people need to submit input from that, or any additional guidance that we want to provide associated with that?
Yeah, there is currently not a deadline. That was one component of our public input. We expect that this will run Ms. Newton well through the time that you all are on your break. And staff will have opportunities for public input. And then when you come back, we think you'll want other opportunities for public input as well. So right now, we're just trying to get people to give us feedback. We also expect that there'll probably be some committees formed, much like you did your Blue Ribbon Committee. So this is just one of the steps that we're doing. And so no, ma'am, right now we don't have a closure time for the public input guidance from the community.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Sure. And I'd like to add, Ms. Newton, as I talked with Administrator Brown, one of the things that we wanted to just kind of keep it open-ended, because as we can make modifications on a quarterly basis, things may arise during these periods of time that we can add on and address. So as things come up in the community that need to be addressed, then definitely the residents of Richland County will have the opportunity to continue to go out there and make sure that we get that information so that we can address it via programming.
Thank you.
Well, yes, ma'am. So if there is nothing further, the last item on our agenda is adjournment.
Move to adjourn.
Second,
Miss Only, if you will, please call for the vote.
Livingston,
yes.
Barron,
Yes.
Newton.
Yes.
Motion
Ms.
passes.
Barron feels it twice.
Yep.
Thank you all so much. Have a good afternoon.
All right,
Bye-bye.
seeing everybody.